Welcome to Astro Chat with Anne Sundell, Kimberly Williams, and Monika Anna. We are three professional astrologers living in three separate countries, coming together every new and full moon to share our 3 points of view on astrology. Whether you enjoy deep dives into the current transits or you are just beginning to learn about astrology for the first time, there is a place for you here. All that is required is an appreciation for astrology, along with a respect for the various traditions within it. So grab a mug of coffee, your favorite cup of tea, or any other beverage of your choice, and join us for a chat on the astrology of the next 2 weeks. Hi, everybody. Welcome back for another Astro Chat with myself, Kimberly Williams, my co-hosts, Anne Sundell and Monika Anna. Welcome, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the next full moon, which is going to be at 16 degrees, 1 minute of Gemini. For those here in the US, I'm in Central Time Zone. It's on December 7th at 10:07 p.m. So we'll hopefully have clear viewing skies of it. And for those on the other side of the pond in the UK, it's at 4:07 a.m. and over in Finland, 6:07 a.m. Is 6 o'clock in the morning sunrise for you, Anne, or does sunrise a lot later? I'm thinking it's probably later.
Right now the sun doesn't rise. Well, it rises, but not for many hours, so it's going to be later.
That's what I was thinking. So, yeah, so hopefully we'll all get some nice nighttime viewing of this lunation. Before we jump into talking about the moon in Gemini, how about Anne sharing some information about the Sabian symbol for this lunation?
Yeah, thanks. It was an interesting discovery because when I looked at the chart, the first impression, and then looking at the Sabian symbol reinforced my first impression. The sentence for 16 degrees of Gemini is a woman, activist in an emotional speech, dramatizing her cause. So what we have discovered so far needs to be expressed, and we might need an audience too.
I really like that. And I think as we dive into unpacking this chart and especially looking at all that Mars energy, we're going to see how it relates to that Sabian symbol a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. But first, let's talk.
It's interesting.
Yeah, go.
Sorry, it's interesting as well that it's emotional speech, and the moon is Gemini. So I just wanted to point that one out before Kimberly will take it away.
I like that. Yeah, emotional speech. And that is a really good way of summarizing or encapsulating the moon in Gemini. It's interesting to me when the moon is in any of the air signs, because the moon often is about that part of our psyche that's unconscious, that is emotional, that is kind of the automatic, where we're not paying conscious awareness, but the information that's flowing through, that we're channeling in, that's tied to our memories or our past, all of that dreamy kind of part of our being. And then here's air, especially in Gemini, that wants to understand, that wants to know, that wants to be more linear, conscious. So it's almost like there's two ways this often plays, and two ways make sense with a mutable sign, especially Gemini, which can bring up a lot about duality. Things are both this and that. What I like is this idea that we can perhaps use our linear mind, our conscious awareness, the parts of our everyday thinking self, to pay attention to what are some of the habits we're caught up in. What are some of the unconscious things? How can we get these two to partner together? How can we bring, maybe journaling or writing, using those Gemini skills to bring information from our unconscious forward? Can be such a wonderful way that they support each other. And also, at the same time, we can also see that, well, sometimes there's a disconnect. What is going on in the head and what is going on in the heart? I find that bridge is really most strongly apparent each month when the moon is in Gemini, and especially when it's on any of the new or full moons. So if there's something going on in my heart that I'm not aware of, if there's something going on in the psyche and the unconscious that I'm choosing not to pay attention to, or I haven't done the work to bring it up into consciousness, maybe I don't want to, maybe I'm just not aware. It's that I'm kind of clueless to what's over here. There can be these bursts where things suddenly happen. And what I find for myself and many of my friends is the inside voice, the one that we often keep quiet and is a little censored, now becomes the out loud voice. And so some of that emotional speech that we would normally have internally can start popping out. At least for me, that's one of the things I find when the moon is in Gemini. Of course, the moon being in a sign, it's important to think, I think, about the sign as well, not just the fact that the moon is there. Gemini is mutable. It means it's changeable, it's flexible. I think if I remember correctly, Isabel Hickey in her books, she gives for every sign kind of a sense of nature. And I think with Gemini, it's like the early summer breeze or the late spring breeze, that idea of the breeze that moves and it goes to and fro. And we have to be flexible. We have to bend with that breeze. To me, that feels very, very Geminian. And it's also very changeable. So when the moon is in Gemini, I find that, yeah, I think it's a country western song. You change just like the weather, but the weather will always change. That's how I feel about the moon in Gemini. My emotions may suddenly pop and something can come out. And now that it's done, now I'm on to something else. It's that whole squirrel syndrome of Gemini energy, where it isn't so much about what's going on in my mind, but what's going on with my heart. The magnets that are pulling me, those strings that are pulling me in different directions. So we may be multitasking in that the minute something has been expressed, now I can move on. Those are some of the ways I find I resonate each year when we have this lovely lunation. What about you girls? What's Gemini moon mean for you?
Go ahead, Monika.
No
Not
hot
all at
seat or
once.
anything.
Yeah.
No, hot seat.
So for me, the moon in Gemini, with moon in an air sign, we're talking about, deep emotional, unconscious drives, trying to reconcile things through our thinking and through our mind. And sometimes they're just simply not compatible. Because you have to feel your feelings. You sometimes, there's no need sometimes to label them. And I feel like moon in Gemini, sometimes, the Gemini sign is the sign of learning, of actually putting the labels so we can understand the world around us through naming things, that kind of power of when something has a name, you have a power over it because you feel like you understood whatever that is, right? And I feel like the moon in Gemini, we're trying to name and understand and label our feelings, and the drive is to do that, to catalog them instead of actually just sinking in and feeling them. Like that kind of spring breeze, you hear then everywhere, but don't actually feel and go deeper. Which is sometimes what's needed with our emotions. So with the full moon in Gemini, we have the height of the season, or the height of the moon, the lunar season, the lunar month, and the emotions running high, as always, with the full moon. And we're trying to label them. We're trying to find words, and we're trying to communicate, and we're trying to express them. And the tension might be between trying to express them and expressing something that it's not possible to put in words. Sometimes with unconscious, with our feelings, there is that air of mystery, and that's okay. It's okay not to know. It's okay to sit with it. But the moon in Gemini is like, no, I need to understand. I need to label it. I need to say it. I need to express it. I need to shout it out. On the other hand, on a positive note, hey ho, I do have sometimes positive spins and things. On a positive things, the moon in Gemini can actually help us name things that we couldn't before. And especially in a communication, in the light of the full moon, we can communicate something that was sitting there and nagging at us, and suddenly we can spit it out. We actually found the word to what we wanted to say for so long. The danger with the full moon always, it might be just too full. You know, it can be a little bit too forward. We just said too much. We found the words, but we just got so excited that we finally can name whatever that is, that we just overwhelm that other person, regardless what we're communicating, whether we're communicating positive things or negative. We just, you know, it's just that onslaught of like, oh my God, it's just like a verbal diarrhea coming through, you know, like suddenly, you know, the gates open and I just can express everything that I wanted for a long time. So with this full moon, and we're going to the aspects, I think there is that energy that I might actually bring that in now, that Mars sitting, you know, on top of the moon in that Gemini, and Mars being retrograde and Mars being out of bounds. We have that kind of uncontrollable, unknown quantity or energy that's sitting there close to our unconscious emotional conditioning. And it's in Gemini, and we're finally found the words and to communicate that. So we have to be careful how and to whom we do that, because I think the last thing any one of us wants is like go to work and finally tell your boss what you really think about him. You know, during the Christmas party, you have few drinks too much, and like have that kind of Martian courage to spit out, you know, what's really wrong with the company, or what really you think about your colleagues, and that might, you know, there's a time and place in delivery that can be constructive, and there is a time and place when it can be just out of bounds. So watching out for that, and for that energy in your life, so it doesn't trip you over. I mean, like we always say on this podcast, it's not about energy that is good or bad. It's just how we use, and making sure that we're not tripping over that we're responding to energy instead of reacting to it, that we're working with it instead of the energy working, you know, through us. And I think personally, the beauty of astrology, the transits that I like, is I understand what atmosphere or what weather I'm stepping into when I look at the transits. And I know if there's going to be a freaking thunderstorm and lightning, I know how to prepare myself for that. Doesn't mean that doesn't trip me every now and then. It really does. But it's a different approach. I know what to prepare. So around this full moon and around the Christmas parties and meeting people, I will bear in mind that, hey, the Mars is a little bit out of bounds, so I need to work with it, and maybe work with that, and go to a dance classes and do something out of the usual, out of the bounds that I usually do with Mars, and use that energy slightly differently than I normally do. Instead of using that energy in a setting when when the Mars will then return to direct motion and to the bounds of the society, I'll go, why did I do that? Why did I said that? Why did I act like that? Yeah. That's my take.
And for anyone who's not familiar with Mars out of bounds, I think we talked about it a lot with the episode we did about the eclipse moon that happened right by Halloween. As that is actually, it was around that week that Mars, I think, went out of bounds and went retrograde. And then we had the eclipse in Scorpio, Mars being the traditional ruler. So if you go back and listen to that, you'll get more information in case this is not a familiar concept. I think it's interesting that Mars is continuing its retrograde until I think it's January 12th. So really, that period from Halloween until just after New Year's is a great time to be looking at, when do I take action? When do I stop myself from taking action? When do I fall prey to reacting? And just noticing. And with this moon in Gemini, I think it's like a perfect time to ask oneself the question of why. Why is that an emotional trigger for me and that one's not? Not why in a self-accusing way, but just in that having some curiosity about oneself, about one's nature, about when do I make it about myself and when do I not? And something you said made me think, Monica, like to me, having this Mars smack in the middle of this lunation, because it's really pretty tight. The full moon is, we said, was going to be at 16 degrees of Gemini, and Mars is also at 16 degrees. We've got just a few tiny minutes of separation here. So this is pretty interwoven. And what occurred to me is if there is a story that is the opposite of the gift of the Magi, this is it. You know, the gift of the Magi, it's like he sold his watch to get a hair combs for his wife. She cut her hair and sold it to get a watch chain for him. It was all about the other, and I'm doing for the other. I think the challenge with some of this Mars retrograde, Mars out of bounds, is all of us are feeling it's time for me to speak my truth, to make it about myself, to state what I need, to take action. And that's great. But what happens when we all do it simultaneously? Can be tough. Can be tough when we're working together or living together and we're both on this journey at the same simultaneous moment. There can be a whole lot of feeling like we're at war with each other rather than supporting each other. Yeah.
And this what's interesting also with this Gemini moon is when it's the reflection of the sun in Sag, because Gemini is also about details. Sag is about seeing the whole picture. So the forest and the trees can be turned around our perspective of looking at different sides, because Mercury can have that's ruling Gemini can have a good look at details, but sometimes we maybe miss the big picture that's there. So that also might bring another view that Mars out of bounds can sometimes also do that we can. And a T-square, I used to like the expression that the T-square is like driving a car with three wheels, and we don't have the fourth that's supporting. The fourth wheel is opposite Neptune. It's on the other side of Neptune, so it would be like 22 degrees of Virgo, and that's the point we should look at for having support for the T-square. But this might be a bit of feeling like an impossible situation. When the T-square is in mutable signs, it's more flexible. It's a bit easier, I think, when you have some movement in the signs, and also but Neptune, Mars, I mean, Mars want to go and Neptune is confusing everything, and maybe also make you have to do some have you cut back on some plans that you wanted to do. Might not, it might be like you feel like you're in an illusion somehow, that you might idealistically want to do something, but the realism is not just working out. So it's good to be prepared on some of these setbacks too with Neptune, and try to be realistic with making plans. Try to be flexible. It's possible that things change, and it's possible that I feel disappointed in what I wanted to accomplish. And Neptune is also, is it stationary like in this chart? So it's a bit more difficult maybe to handle, or a bit stronger when it's also together with Jupiter. So it's hard to say exactly how it's going to work out on the individual level. I think it's best to check out the placement where you have Neptune. That might tell you something about the area of life where you might face some kind of difficulties or setbacks during this phase that you need to that's good to be aware of. So it's 22 degrees of Fisher's sign. What do you think about this T-square?
Neptune is an interesting planet, isn't it? Because it's the planet of our dreams and manifestation and connecting to the source and having those mystical experiences. And by that, I don't necessarily mean we have to go, you know, to an ashram and have a mystical experience while meditating. Sometimes, you know, as you go on the shore of the lake or of the sea, you walk with your loved one, and you have that overwhelming sense of being part of something bigger. You know, those kind of mystical experiences when you really connect, and you understand that you're part of something bigger, and you have been here before the earth was even conceived, and you will be here much longer. That's Neptune. At the same time, Neptune is the planet of illusion and dissolution as well. So it's the planet of, you know, everything that we're kidding ourselves with, you know, everything that we believe, you know, the whole marketing and ad campaigns, you know, things that, you know, they're selling the dream that's not quite there, if I can put it politely. That's very Neptunian realm, you know, selling you the dream, trying to tease you with that kind of mirage of the vision that you're hoping for. And then when you know, buy the product or go wherever that is, or trying to do something, actually you find out it's not quite as expected. And that disappointment sets, you know, Neptune is the planet of disappointment as well. It's the planet where, you know, things are dissolving. You know, this is the planet of dissolving things. And with that square at the full moon, we have that extra energy of something is dissolving in us. So going back to the point I was making earlier, you know, is that moon and Mars going to take over the Gemini nature in our chart, and suddenly we'll find the words and to express things, and finally we'll find a path, or we will be presented with two options, or finally we'll find, like Kimberly said, that curiosity in us, or we will be disappointed with something, and that Mars and moon energy, instead of pushing us towards expressing the dream or expressing the vision that we have, and finding the words and labels for that bubbled up energy can actually turn negative and erupt because something has been dissolved, something has been disappointing, something has been you know, not quite as we imagined it to be. And I'm using those words specifically because it's Neptune. You know, when we tend to use that in language as well, it's like, oh, it's not as I hoped for. That's so Neptune, that you imagine something and you hang your hopes on something, and then when you kind of met with reality, it wasn't quite as you hoped for. And again, this is not a judgment call. Sometimes not what you hoped for, actually it's a blessing, you know, actually the reality might be even better than what you hoped for. But that kind of Neptunian, oh, everything that you put together is dissolving. And how is that? Fiery Gemini moon, full moon energy is coping with that. The way I think about the T-square, I like, Anne, that you brought that four-wheel kind of metaphor. The way I always thought about a T-square, it's like a bow. When the planet is opposition, it's like, you know, the kind of bow that you're holding, and the planet on the back is the one that you're pulling back. And then when you leave it, it shoots into that point, that empty, so to speak, point, opposing the whole set. And it's interesting to look into that point for resolution. What am I kind of aiming for? Where am I? It's a T-square, it's an aspect of tension. So what am I getting tense about? What is that kind of opposing point that I'm looking forward to, that can bring the resolution, can bring different point of view, and can balance that tense energy? So I guess that's my tip for this full moon as well. Have a look in your chart, maybe for that resolution point at 22 Virgo, and see where is it in your chart, and what in that area of life, or the planets involved, if you have any planets around that that 22 Virgo, how they can help you resolve the tension.
I love that image of the bow, especially since the sun is in Sagittarius the Archer. That makes so much sense.
Mm.
Um, okay, so I love the image you did about the bow, since the sun is in Sagittarius the Archer. That makes so much sense to me. And I think also I appreciate squares and T squares. I appreciate the tension they bring, even though it's not always easy. Because I read a long time ago that the tension is often what will motivate us towards change, right? If everything's good, why change? And
Mhm.
I'm thinking here that with this sun being involved in that full moon, that this is a good time for some awareness, conscious awareness about our default, our unconscious default around action, around the self orientation drive. And so perhaps that dissolving energy of Neptune that you were referring to, it can be channeled here, right? During this moon energy and the 2 weeks that follow, it can be channeled into some like real gentle cord cutting. What
Mhm.
is it that stops me from pulling back on that bow? What is where am I afraid that arrow will fly? Am I afraid I will miss the mark? What is it around inaction that makes it so difficult for me to maybe embrace some aspect of this Mars? And
Mhm.
here is a great chance to really let that go, dissolve that. A full moon is a time of total energy, but as we've discussed so often, it's also a moment of release. So here's a great chance to let it go. And simultaneously, that Neptune at 22 degrees of the fishes is so close to Jupiter, right? It's Jupiter's at 29. Actually, that's a more intense energy, a tighter orb than Neptune's having even with the full moon, as Anne had mentioned a while ago. So this is not the first time we've seen Jupiter at the tail end of Pisces. So if you go back and you look at when that happened before, maybe you'll see some overlap between then and now. But we're getting ready for Jupiter to go into Aries and stay in Aries. And so something about the dream and how do I make it real? How do I bring something that's my vision, which is so Piscean? How do I make it real and concrete? And what is the action I take? We've talked for months now about it's time to create the reality we want. As we've been talking about stuff involving Saturn and the eclipses, we've talked for months about there's a lot of fear that sometimes the final action we need to take to create that is brings up a whole load of karmic past, fear, pain, sorrow. So I kind of am hoping that this Neptune will be sort of that gentle, let's just let it go. Even if we don't know why, even if we don't know why we stop, let's let go of what we're holding on to around not stepping into our truth, our power, ourself. And, kind of like that hero's journey, let's make that return. Let's step out. Let's come forward as who we are and follow our bliss. That's my very Neptunian woo-woo positive approach.
I do like that not only we have a different approach to astrology, but actually different angles as well, and that we do mix the positive and I don't want to say negative, but maybe like cautious approach, or kind of looking at the creative aspects of the planet, and maybe the kind of destructive again. It's interesting that you bring the dissolution as well, because I was looking actually on that Neptune and Jupiter, and there is this kind of feel around those two planets again meeting close, and Jupiter stepping into the 29 degrees mark again, both of them stationary as well, and to change direction, that there is this huge sense of being flooded with something, literally or metaphorically, and that kind of wave of tsunami coming in, that kind of moment when you see that wave coming at you metaphorically, or physically, and there's this moment of like, wow, I need to take a deep breath, and let it either wash over me. I need to learn how to surf. And I think this is the moment with that tension between those two planets in Pisces and that Mars square as well. This kind of moment, it's like, okay, what do I need to let go because it doesn't serve me? And I love that you bring this up, and I think this is another great tip for this full moon. what doesn't serve me, and I literally need to dissolve it in the water, in the, you know, dissolve it with the alcohol, you know, help the spirits, help dissolve all the stress and drama, dissolve it with your tears, salty water is good, or dissolve it, you know, by going for a swim in the ocean if you close by and you're that lucky. But have that, you know, dissolve what doesn't serve you anymore. And it's interesting. I'm kind of, now I'm trying to think, like, what am I going to do at that full moon to help me with certain, especially emotional connections, very Gemini connections, and language that I got, and communication that I got, and conditioning that I got through the language, that I just need to let go. You know, those messages that we got as a children, who you are, how you should behave, you know, what is good, what is not good, what the good girls do, so to speak. And I think, you know, even for me personally, I think that might be a moment of that tension where, you know what, I need to just let it wash over me and washed away. It's also interesting, I'm going to bring the Jupiter and Venus is in a square, they're both in square. So we have two malefics, again, connected to this full moon, and they both in the aspects of tension. So we have situation where this is a full moon, and there's a lot of tension riding on it, including the freaking Mars, as we said, right bang on that moon, being out of bounds, not caring, and bring that kind of really Martian energy. And what Kimberly, you said earlier on about sometimes, you know, the tension is needed to move forward. Absolutely. I mean, look at our own lives. When do we actually make decisions? Usually when we're kind of annoyed or angry or really pissed off. It's like, no, that's it, I'm done. Like, I need to do something, whether it's about, you know, your health, whether it's about your relationship, whether it's about work. You know, no one changes work, or not many people have that kind of drive to go like, do you know what, I want change, I invite change, I'm looking for a change. You know, we tend to go for change was like, oh, I'm done, I can't stand this situation, this person, this, you know, this work anymore, I can't stand them, and the tension has been unbearable. How many people in your life have you spoken to that said to you, I've changed something? Why? Oh, I couldn't bear it any longer. That tension was too much. I could not bear it any longer.
Yeah.
And this is what this full moon, I think, brings to us. It brings us that kind of tension with the Neptune and Jupiter saying, hey, there is an opportunity to reconnect with the source and have that washed away as well, or being, you know, washed over and completely overwhelmed. And that Jupiter and Venus, actually two benefics, again having a tensive aspects. It's like two best friends, you know, but actually they really don't see eye to eye for this time. So it's like, well, we still like each other, but we also don't get along at the moment. So what can we do with that? So again, there is a creativity, I think, in that tension. Venus being in Sagittarius and Jupiter being in Pisces, there's a lot of creativity in those two signs and in that tension to say, hey, maybe we can find a Venus a different way to go forward, different vision, and Jupiter in Pisces can help with those dreams as well. So I think there's this kind of creative tension between two of them to look up, you know, the Sagittarian idea, look out there, look into horizon. And with Jupiter, it's like, okay, how can I create that vision?
Yeah.
And that's my take.
And we have allies here too. Okay. I'm not going to go into depth on it because I want to be mindful of time. But with that full moon energy, those two luminaries, they both are making either a trine or a sextile to Chiron, right? The moon in Gemini is making a trine to that very fiery Chiron, and it's making a sextile to Chiron, and Chiron's making a trine to the sun. And then it reverses, right? The sun is making a lovely sextile to Saturn, and Saturn is making a trine to the moon. So you have, like, you know, both of the harmonious aspects coming from the luminaries to what are often considered two very difficult, heavy planetary bodies, asteroid bodies. So I just want to say, like, with that Saturn being brought in this very positive, harmonious way, perhaps this is a great time to look to who are the teachers, the mentors, the guides that can help us. And it may not necessarily be I sign up for a class or I'm getting a psychologist. It could be, it may not be. It could just be I'm having a conversation out loud and somebody being my sounding board allows me to hear that nugget of wisdom that is going to bring healing. And so, with all that contact to Chiron, I think there's some healing that can happen. And of course, Chiron's in Aries. So, healing about I make it too much about myself, I make it not enough about myself. Bringing some balance to that. The healing around I'm ready to take action, I don't take action. Maybe I take action on behalf of others, but not for myself. What is, flushing out, unpacking that fuller meaning, reasoning behind the story. I think this can be so profound. So I would say pay attention to who do you lean into? Who do you want to talk to, use your words with, and listen to what is coming up in those conversations because there could be, unexpected allies from without that are helping everyone on their journey here.
I really like that.
Because, yeah, me too. And I'm thinking about that we had a quite long period now when we had a lot of under energy, under not so visible energy, and also a lot of maybe secrets or hidden feelings and things that just hasn't been able to come up to the surface. And with Gemini, that Mars, it's more like now they have a possibility just to pop up and just get them out and just feel now maybe you can be honest about some things that you didn't feel were possible before. Retrograde Mars can also have that effect that you rather go sideways than go directly telling another person what you need or what you want. So it might be within some limits good to use that energy to resolve some old issues.
Yeah, definitely. And Monika started mentioning Venus. I also want to bring in Mercury here. So Venus and Mercury are both under the beams of the sun, meaning that if you're living where this full moon is happening during the nighttime hours, we're still not going to necessarily be able to see them, depending on where you live, how close they are to the horizon. They're in that they're pulling away from the sun, but they haven't pulled away enough yet to be visible stars. So there's a sense for me of invisibility around what's going on with Mercury. Additionally, Mercury is at 1 degree of Capricorn. So even though it's making a conjunction to Venus, even though it's following Venus and making that square to the Pisces Jupiter, it's all out of sign. It's all happening, but by degree, but it's out of sign. So I almost feel like as the planet that rules that Gemini moon, the dispositor of that moon, there can be a lot of feeling unseen and unheard. Or if not currently feeling unseen or unheard, when have I? What is it in the past that I'm holding on to? What are those unconscious feelings, the memories, but the feelings around the memory? Maybe I've resolved the issue, but that doesn't mean I've released the emotions that were attached there. And sometimes just honoring that part of ourselves, giving voice to it, hearing what we needed to hear, even if it's from another person. Like all of these can be so powerful. But I don't think this is even though it's a Gemini moon, I don't feel like the linear side of our brain is really driving the bus. It's the unconscious side that's driving things, the automatic, the reptilian brainstem, all of the things that are primal, that make us human. The conscious, reflective mind, well, that might come in after the fact. That might come in later. But right now, it just feels like everything that we're looking at is sort of it's like a ball that we're pushing underwater, right? And there's some energy that's just pushing that Mercury down to be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You can think about it later. You can reflect on it. You can get very ultra verbal, ultra linear later. Right now, how about we stop thinking about our feelings and we feel our feelings? So it's almost like the universal pause button has been hit in my mind on that Mercury here.
I don't know about you both, but when I look at this chart for the full moon, it just feels like we're really going to get annoyed. That's the predominant feeling that I get, and it might be like, I don't know why, it's just something doesn't sit right with me. I'm not quite sure why, that tension with the Neptune. Maybe my true feelings and how I feel are obscured, so I'm going to take it out on my partner, but I'm actually really annoyed that I didn't perform at work, but there might be some kind of obscurity, not quite see it, the Neptunian fog. Can't get in touch with how I want to express myself or what I really feel, because the Venus and Mercury are not visible. So it's just a whole lot of a bucket of annoyed. That's how I feel.
What do you mean with getting annoyed? Aren't you annoyed yet?
Yes. Have you not felt that out of bound Mars? I am so annoyed.
Mars?
That is so true. That is really so true. Yeah, there is a lot of underlying anger and rage, and again, we've been talking about it. There are other aspects and other asteroids that speak to that. Obviously this is not for the full moon episode, because if we were to start, we might as well record like 5-hour podcast. There's a lot of rage going on. Yes, Anne, you're absolutely right. And that full moon, it's like that little kind of popper that's like, is it going to pop open or is it not? Is it going to be like a little volcano and just going to erupt? And if so, how? I think with everything, we've discussed that anger in itself is not negative emotion. We all feel it and we all need to express it. It's just, are you expressing it in a constructive way, or are you expressing it in a way that you're damaging yourself and the people that you love? So there's nothing wrong to say to someone with that Martian assertiveness how you really feel about them. But are you doing that to heal that relationship and actually express stuff that you maybe didn't have words to express a few years ago, and you've been through, I don't know, therapy, and you found the words and now you want to have that conversation? Or are you just going there because you feel annoyed and that Mars is taking over and you're feeling out of bounds and you're just going to spit it out regardless of the consequences?
Yeah.
And when we're talking about facing these issues or having these conversations face to face with that person, but I feel that retrograde Mars is a lot about speaking around, talking to other people, going like on the back of the person, like you're not having the courage to tell directly or find the right boundary with it. So,
yeah. This is a good time to explore, and as you say, Anne, with other people, the things I want to say, whether I need to say it to another person or I need to say it to myself. I don't feel this is the time, while Mars is retrograde, to actually have the confrontation, right? January 12th is not that far away. Let's wait until we get through the holidays, and then we'll have lots of chance to explore Mars. It stays out of bounds until May. So hopefully we'll be inspired with some of that genius that can happen there once it goes direct and it stays out of bounds, and we'll find new ways of taking action going forward. I think to try to respond to things right now, it's so easy to fall into being reactionary versus responsive. So I really like that. I think that's good advice, Anne, to explore starting to practice this, talking things out, but not necessarily head on one-on-one with the person or the place where you're having that conflict. And then I guess this is a good time to move into, there's a few other things we noticed, but we're not going to take up time to talk about, but it might be useful to some of our folks who are following along and joining in our chat. The outer planets continue to be active as always. So if you in your natal chart have some prominent placements in the middle of those fixed signs, Uranus continues to be conjunct the North Node, opposing the South Node, making a T-square to Saturn, due to everybody's direct and retrograde dance, that's still in play. So you might want to go back and review that, listen to some of our prior podcasts, or listen to some other folks out there who are talking about these issues. If you've got middle of the mutable signs as something that's very significant for you, or tends to be kind of points that trigger things, pay a little more attention to that wide orb sun moon squaring, making that T-square to Neptune. And if you are a cardinal oriented person, especially those last 5-6 degrees of the cardinal signs, we have Pluto at 26 degrees Capricorn, making a beautiful sextile to Jupiter at 29 Pisces. So that might be another ally that you can use, and you might want to look and see how that's hitting or impacting your chart. Again, I think we've been going long enough on the things that really stood out for us, but of course we could sit, as we have done, the three of us before,
Yeah.
we can sit for hours and keep dissecting and keep dissecting. But do you guys have anything else you want to add in before we go into closing with tips and tricks?
No. I think that maybe one thing, I think this is definitely a dynamic full moon. And after the eclipse season, I feel like both the new moon in Sagittarius and this full moon in Gemini are really shifting the energy. And that shift is visible. Things started moving, and with the planets stationing and going direct, we can really see the energy direction changing in our own lives and within our own selves. So I think there is something to it. The eclipse season has been probably the heaviest that I've seen, and I've experienced, and the people around me experienced. So as tricky as this full moon is, I think we need a bit of a shift and a bit of a dust up, kind of, well, not dust up, dusting off the energy of the Scorpion, Taurus, and actually having something else coming in.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so I'll jump in first. It's a Gemini moon, so therefore I have 2 tips of things I plan on practicing, and I'm keeping it pretty simple because I think there's a lot happening. As Monika said, this is dynamic, and a lot of this we're going to have chances in the months ahead to continue working on. My first tip is make a list of feeling words. Pick a feeling, anger, joy. What is the thing that is hardest for you to talk about, or what is the thing most on your mind right now? Pick an emotion and make a list of how many words you can use to describe it. I have to tell you that when I'm angry, I'm angry. I might be resentful. It's very hard for me to get into any more words than that. And when communicating with another person, well, there's a big difference between I'm slightly irritated, I'm overwhelmed, to I'm furious, right? There's various there, and it really helps in communication when one can. This is what I've been told by other experts. It really helps communicate with others when I have more words to explain what I'm feeling. It also helps me communicate with myself when I can give voice to those parts of myself that feel unseen, unheard, ignored, unused, to be able to speak on their behalf with more feeling words than just 2 or 3. So that's tip 1. And tip number 2 is, if you are willing, take some time to go back to what was life like when you were a lovely little 2-year-old. We have our first Mars return at 2. It takes Mars about 2 years to go through the zodiac, right? So maybe there was something prominent that is a skill you had that you no longer use, or a trauma you experienced that is still hanging in that unconscious mind. Is there some kind of wisdom we can find from just thinking about, reviewing what was life like when I was 2? And those are my 2 tips that I'm leaving it right there. How about y'all?
Well, I have a tip that's maybe a bit different. I lied in the beginning of the podcast because I read that you have to have an audience for your discussion, but you don't need to have that. You can have a speech without an audience, and that's what I want you to practice on, to have a speech to somebody, some things you want to say, and you maybe can't say to that person, and maybe shouldn't do it right now in person. Do it without the person. Talk and get your get out what you want to say to that person, practice on that speech. That's
So
my
for me, Mars retro can also bring that kind of anger and frustration that we forgot we actually had in us or carried with us, and make us really like Mars can manifest as anxiety. It can manifest as a depression as well if we don't work with that energy. Mars is effectively our life energy. So it can, if it's suppressed, if it's not quite expressed the way it needs to be, it can create that kind of uncomfortable feeling, disease within us, within our body, within our psyche. So for Mars retro and Mars in out of bounds, I suggest look into your own chart, see where your natal Mars is, and do something out of box connected to that. So if you have, Mars in Pisces, for example, and you've always liked I don't know, meditation and always liked swimming, that's great. You can express Mars through that, but maybe do something else. Maybe see if you can, I don't know, do the meditative movement, when you kayak or when you dance, or something that will take you out and express that Mars energy, but in a way that still be pleasurable, still be great, but something that you haven't tried before, or you're not that familiar with. So just use the retrograde motion of the Mars to maybe get to know it a little bit better.
Beautiful. I'm going to hopefully make time to try all those ideas from both of y'all as well as my own. And with that, I think we've come to the end of our Astro Chat for this lovely full moon. As always, I'm so curious to hear how this plays out for you out there. Feel free to comment, to share your thoughts. Is there something else happening in this lunation that stands out as important for you that we didn't talk about? Let's keep the conversation going.
And thank you everybody for watching our podcast and listening to us.
Bye. Thank you for joining us in this week's Astro Chat. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion and would love to hear about anything that resonated with you. Keep the conversation going by posting shareable content on our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube pages. You can also email us at astrochatpodcast@gmail.com. Astro Chat is uploaded every 2 weeks on the Saturday before each new and full moon. Look for us on your favorite podcast platform as well as on YouTube. You can support Astro Chat and receive exclusive content by donating on our Patreon page. We look forward to chatting with you all again at the next lunation of the moon.